Hello, my name is Dziwenka. I'm going to be talking about a paradigmatic shift, an awakening gradual cultivation paradigm that I have applied to martial art practice. Martial arts spiritual practice from process to practice to intuition. I'm Dziwenka from the Center for International Education in the History Department at Salisbury University in the United States of America. So what happens, what goes on in the minds of longtime martial art practitioners when they are practicing? What is it that they understand of as practice? What does practice mean to longtime practitioners, people who are master level practitioners of martial arts, who continue to practice after decades or scores of years? And what does practice mean to them in terms of how it affects the rest of their lives? I'm going to introduce a paradigm of practice that I'll be using as an umbrella paradigm that will take in many of the aspects of a number of the key physical education and martial art paradigms of practice that are in academia right now. The paradigm of practice is called the sudden awakening gradual cultivation paradigm of practice. It's based on Buddhist spiritual practice, fundamentally of Huayan Buddhism, which was developed in the 8th and 9th century CE in China. And the paradigm of practice of that is applied to, ever since the 13th, 14th century, has been applied to Chan or Zen or Son Buddhist spiritual practice. So I'm going to talk about the theoretical framework of this paradigm of practice. I'm going to show how it relates to other major aspects of practice. I'm going to talk about the three main aspects of this type of practice, this paradigm of practice. And then I'm going to show you the words and comments and understandings of longtime practitioners that I interviewed. I participated in ethnographic research in which I obtained an IRB in order to interview longtime practitioners of martial arts to see what their understanding of practice is. So the alignment of elements of various paradigms of practice, the purpose of this presentation is to attempt to explicate the fundamental elements of paradigms of practice in martial arts, phys ed, and bodily awareness and meditation might align with each other and be consolidated into a unified paradigm based on the sudden awakening gradual cultivation paradigm that I am introducing. All paradigms I will introduce discuss right practice. And this concept of right practice includes rigorous discipline, behavioral or technical, repetition of patterns of defined and idealized forms, again, technical or behavioral, focus concentration, that means analytical discernment of what you're doing, and stabilizing the mind and getting rid of any extraneous thoughts, two types of concentration. Right practice also includes bodily and cognitive awareness of the self in the act. And right practice includes the potential for instances of some form of paradigmatic shift or epiphany or transcendence or awakening experience of what is practiced that may allow not only for internalization of what is practiced, but also for the development of intuition, a basis of creativity of the practice. Intuition is a goal of all kinds of practice. Each of the paradigms of practice that I'm going to introduce and the sudden awakening gradual paradigm of practice that I'm going to introduce holds that intuition is a key goal of practice. Paulo Freire refers to the goal of practice as praxis, which is the reflection and action directed at the structures to be transformed. So we reflect on and perform actions and do behaviors that we are taught in order to transform those behaviors and actions and practices and techniques into something deeper and more meaningful and relatable and experiential to ourselves individually. Real life examples of these aspects of practice in the martial arts context, compiled by a qualitative ethnographic research methodology by me interviewing longtime martial art practitioners, supports the view that these paradigms of practice have aspects that are in alignment with each other. Many of these longtime practitioners from Taekwondo, competition Taekwondo, traditional Taekwondo, Tang Sudo, Changmukwan, Murakwan, Subakdo, Shilat, Kali, Junfan, Jiu-Jitsu. These are the people that I've interviewed, longtime practitioners who have international certification as master practitioners of these different martial arts. The template of the practice of the paradigm of practice that I'm going to introduce is the sudden awakening gradual cultivation paradigm. The sudden awakening gradual cultivation paradigm suggests that there are three major aspects of this paradigm: Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. Shila is discipline. Samadhi is focused concentration. Prajna is wisdom. This is in the Buddhist context. But what about the martial art context? What are these three aspects of this paradigm of practice in the martial art context? The classical Buddhist definition of Shila is behavior and technical discipline, precepts, disciplines, rules, the fundamental practice which focuses on the nurturance of morality. That's the Buddhist concept of Shila. Samadhi, what is that? Focused and meditative concentration or mental absorption, mental equanimity conducive to and derived from intention, perfectly focused on the object, whatever it is the object is of the focus of the concentration. Prajna, which is wisdom, cognitive acuity, or insight based on perceiving all things in their true and essential nature. So these are the Buddhist definitions of these concepts. What are the martial art definitions of these concepts? In the context of martial art practice, I define Shila, which is technical and behavior discipline, as the process of repetitively learning, practicing, and applying the physical techniques of training and the strategies of applying them. This may also include the repetitive emphasis on, enactment of, and exposure to the learning of moral precepts, rituals, systems of ethics, and philosophy involved in a martial art, a martial sport training system, as well as the practical applications. Taekwondo, karate do, subakdo, all of these, many of these martial arts have superstructure of an ethical system, and these practitioners that I interviewed will talk about them. Martial sport training is a learning and application of these aspects of techniques as a foci of concentration. So the techniques, technical techniques or behavior is the focus. And the activity of focus concentration of and on these techniques of training as the precursor to being in meditation, which is a Shila, Samadhi, Prajna simultaneity, which I'll talk about later, the key aspect of this presentation. Martial practice is the enactment of focus concentration. Fundamentally, Shila augments the building and generation of knowledge of and expertise in the technical and behavioral aspects of a particular martial art that the practitioner is practicing. In the context of martial art practice, I define Samadhi, or focus concentration, as focus concentration up to the point of being in meditation on the aspects of Shila, moment by moment, during the execution of acts of Shila, be they behavioral or technical things. I also include in my definition the intense and focused form of Samadhi found in martial art practice, the concentration required in training to effectively deal with a simulated life or death situation, self-defense situation, the oft-discussed martial spirit mindset. This focused concentration on the technique being done in the present moment, this essence in repetition, you can look at my work and Deshamro's work, which is right practice, again, McIntyre's work, Wilkinson's and Esté's work, and mine. Right practice opens up the possibility for an epiphany or a transformative experience or paradigmatic shift or sudden understanding and awakening experience, not only to occur, but to be understood as such by the practitioner. In the context of martial art practice, I define prajna, wisdom, cognitive acuity, or insight, as the paradigmatic shift experience, continuation and deepening of martial art practice. It is the paradigmatic shift or transformative experience, continuation of the pre-experience practice. So I call the post-experience of a paradigmatic shift, I call the practice of that practice as cultivation of that experience. And practice of cultivation of a transformative experience, which is a Shila, Samadhi, Prajna simultaneity, includes the internalizing and intuiting of Shila, so that the aspects of Shila or technique may become integral to one's self-identity. Thus, transformative experience practice is merely both the practice towards and the practice of the syncretism, the harmonization of Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna together. However, upon experiencing this paradigmatic shift or this sudden awakening or this epiphany, which is the simultaneity of Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna, wisdom then becomes gradual cultivation, cultivation of this simultaneity, cultivation of this transformative experience. So before having the transformative experience, you're practicing the syncretism of these three aspects. After having the transformative experience, you're practicing the cultivation of this transformative experience. Understanding waking from the Buddhist perspective is a sudden and incomplete awakening, no mind or no thought, a simultaneity of Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. Understanding awakening is a sudden and incomplete awakening. It is a momentary, fleeting awakening. It's fleeting and momentary. It's not a constant state because we have these existing bad habits of attachment which keep us away from continuing in the mindset of this transformative experience. A practitioner must, in order for a practitioner to have this transformative experience, they must try to simultaneitize these three aspects of practice. They try to make them as a simultaneity. According to Robert Jinul, the world-renowned scholar of Hawaiian Buddhism and religious studies, the true mystical experience of the transformative simultaneity lies in universal claim that its soteric goal of spiritual practice, and as I'm saying, of martial art practice, is not an experience at all. It's a way of life, of conduct, of a manner of acting. The goal of martial art practice, as it is of Buddhist spiritual practice, is a way of life, a manner of acting, a way of conduct that the transformative experience can certainly augment. So in terms of meditation, there are two fundamental constituents of classical Buddhist meditation. One is stabilizing meditation, which is stilling the mind, getting rid of extraneous thoughts, and focusing on and developing the ability to focus on one thing that you want to emphasize and focus on as your stilling the mind aspect of practice. The other type of meditation is insight or analytical or discernment meditation, which investigates or analyzes essential natures of techniques and behaviors with mindfulness and wisdom. So in the context of martial art practice, I define the first one, the calm, abiding, or stabilizing meditation or focused concentration. I define that as the putting of the mind in a state through repetitive and long time enactment of fundamental technical and behavioral discipline, thus through practice, the putting of the mind in a state in which a sudden transformative experience might occur, which in turn allows for internalization of what is learned. In the context of martial art practice, I define insight or analytical or discernment meditation as the use of this stabilizing meditation, the stabilizing of the mind through technical and behavioral discipline and focused concentration to allow for the growing and deepening of wisdom. This insight, analytical, or discernment meditation is the enactment of techniques and behaviors through and with mindfulness and wisdom, and thus includes the process towards and syncretism of Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna that would engender the simultaneity of those three, which is the transformative experience. So in analytical discernment meditation, you are deeply analyzing the essence of technique or behavior that you're engaging in, that you're focusing on. There are a number of key figures that have come up with paradigms of practice in phys ed and martial arts that are under the umbrella of my sudden awakening gradual cultivation paradigm. McIntyre, a phys ed theoretician, talks about his concept of practice, which is a cooperative human activity. The goods internal to practice are agreed upon in the social community. They are realized, goods are realized through the achievement of those standards, technical proficiency, development of one's own identity, and transcendence of community-imposed standards of excellence are all part of his concept of practice. Seymour Kleinman, the famous Ohio State professor who combined East and West paradigms of practice for his somatic view of physical education. And he established his 6 objectives of freedom and self-expression in his understanding of a paradigm of practice of phys ed, to develop an awareness of bodily being in the world, to gain an understanding of self and consciousness, to grasp the significations of movements, to become sensitive to one's encounters and acts around him and individuals around him, to discover and uncover deeper meaning of one's being as it explores movement experiences, and ultimately to enable one to create his or her own experiences through movement in a meaningful, purposeful way and with realization of the self. So again, from simple technique to realization of the self is part of Kleinman's paradigm. Woven is 8 elements of deliberative practice: high repetitions, continuous objective feedback, extensive and ongoing focus and concentration. It must be hard, it must be challenging to just out of our reach of achievement at our current level of ability. It involves self-regulation about the process. We can adjust the process to fit ourselves. It's self-regulatory, and it requires intricate self-observation, self-monitoring, and we judge ourselves against a standard which we use to evaluate our development toward that standard. Of course, the famous development of the concept of flow that's involved in this activity. That's part of the paradigm of this paradigm of practice. The flow activity, which could be experienced during a paradigmatic shift of a martial art practitioner, involves unself-conscious self-assurance, focusing attention on the activity, penetrating attention, he calls it, discovering new solutions, being creative, the activity being spontaneous or self-generated, seems coming out of nowhere, and can result from a structured activity. Again, part of the umbrella sudden awakening gradual cultivation paradigm. Last is Robert Jinul, my mentor, who talks about the mystical experience. How or why does this disciplined behavior with meditative concentration lead to a breakthrough in or deepening of understanding? And he refers to a mystical experience as a state of mind achieved commonly through some sort of self-cultivation. And the salient features of a mystical experience, a paradigmatic shift, a sudden awakening experience, are a feeling of oneness or unity, conviction that it is somehow revelatory of some truth, a sense that the experience is ineffable, difficult to explain through language. It involves a sensation of what we consider normal intellectual operations. And there's a strong affective feeling, sensing tone. Robert Jinul on mysticism says, the real purpose of calming meditation is to prepare the practitioner for the exercise of discernment meditation. Calming meditation immunizes the meditator against disturbances. Discernment meditation is the meditative procedure by which Buddhists critically evaluate their mystical experiences and use them as experiential correlatives of particular doctrines. You can apply this to martial arts. Discernment meditation in the martial arts is where you can critically evaluate your transformative experience and use them as experiential correlatives to the doctrines of your specific martial art. The soteriological goal is not an experience of transformative experience only, but using that transformative experience to engender and develop a way of life, a conduct. I define practice as essence and repetition initially, in which body awareness and technical skill are channeled through the concentration and attentiveness of the mind. It suggests that the mindful practitioner utilizes awareness of both the mind and the body to constantly refine his or her execution of techniques, and that this experience are repeated over and over. Over time and repetition, as the execution of techniques and enactment of behaviors becomes more and more timely, efficient, and effective, as well as the more ingrained in the practitioner, he or she may be able to internalize many aspects of these techniques and may come to understanding an essential nature of bodily awareness and movement to the point of having an immediate, without thinking, almost intuitive sense of how and when to execute techniques, and enact behaviors correctly and in a timely manner, and even create uniquely timely and corrective action or behavior that is right and may even be creative for an emergent situation. You're internalizing to the point of intuiting. So let's look at some of the participants. These are all long-time martial art practitioners who, in my 2 to 6 hour interviewing of them and going over their interviews and coming up with questions to ask them based on what they said, here's what they talked about. The initial focus was getting them to talk about what they understand of as practice after 20, 30, 40 years of practicing a particular martial art or martial arts. So here's Bill talking about his attempt at or towards a syncretism of the three aspects of the paradigm of practice. Practicing the fundamentals over and over and over again gives you the basis of concept as compared to actual specifics, giving the tools to be able to make your own choices. I came to understand that there are all principles and concepts that are universal. That actually truly teaches students how to control their emotions, transcend physical activity, make yourself a better person by transcending kicking and walking emotions, and of course the moral superstructure that many taekwondo schools have. You must practice with all of your mind, all of your concentration, all of your focus. Do it with as much detail as possible. The person willing to analyze and stay analytical and go through a scientific process of practice is going to get much further in the cultivation of their martial art and cultivation of themselves. But the first is analytical. And it goes through the drudgery of actually consciously thinking about it. Makes me feel like a monkey wrench instead of gears. Then there's not to put too much pressure on myself and not to think too hard. You don't know how much you think you know. Truly accepting that not thinking too much is where the wisdom of doing it correctly will come in eventually. Understanding is a good thing to a certain point, but a person having an understanding of their understanding is a multidimensional thing. And we'll go through a long, all-inclusive process of finding the efficient use of repetition way of doing things, as opposed to a conscious thought process. So repetitiveness allows your thinking to be focused. Peter, I feel that all disciplines are stepping stones. They all are, in a sense, meditation. You have to do something to experience an epiphany. We all call it discipline, but you cannot have an epiphany when you have parameters. If you have a discipline that is strict parameters compared to practicing it all your life, and your teacher telling you that it works, that's a belief system. My philosophy was my teacher's philosophy. You question tradition, but when your training is strictly one martial art, just strictly discipline, that's ego, that's tradition, that's discipline, that's not yours. The truth held by me, by my radical empiricism, the truth held by me is something that has to be generated by myself. Anything can work, but it has to have timing, distance, and rhythm. You're perfecting your technique. And when you master it, a punch is a punch, it's a full circle. Meaning what you initially understood as the many fine points of what to do in order to make a punch becomes something much more philosophical later on. What the martial art discipline allows me to do is to stay focused and to calm myself. Then it becomes a form of meditation that you can master the self with. Discipline is really a tool against ego. Once you apply discipline as an activity, you become focused. You won't learn proper technique if you're thinking too much. You need to feel it. It'll come. First, free yourself. How can you develop something else when you're bringing your ego into it? Eric, I free myself from something else. I don't really think about anything when I kick. It's just me and the movement. It's kind of an escape from reality. If I want to be me, if I want to be myself, nobody or nothing, I go kick. He loses himself when he kicks. On jump. It's easy for humans to get too narrowly focused and miss out on the big picture. It's about to have a personal practice to expand my mind or perspective. I like to think that practice has helped me maintain a better perspective and a more balanced thinking process. Significantly, perspective only comes over practice, over time. Martial art practice is conditioning your fundamental techniques. Your intention is to refine that technique, but you're refining the deliverer of that. You're refining yourself. Martial art is a moving art form, an ongoing process. Every aspect of the process is a everything is interrelated. Tom, about his attempt at syncretism of these three aspects. For sure, the physical components of what was experiencing have changed very little, but the mental component, the way I would have learned or experienced 30 years later, would be totally different. It's a mental thing more so than physical as you go further in your practice. The contents are so important to me, like a religion. You believe strongly in the core aspects of religion. In my case, I believe God has evolved a lot of good from a lot of areas. I brought it to God. I believe so strongly that I apply these aspects to all parts of my life. He will, as he has worked out, applying the moral aspects of Taekwondo that he's been taught to his life. Eric, in my experience of no mind, Mushim, or he called it Mushim, which is the Korean pronunciation of no mind, it's a sort of like to remember. Mind is the state of Mushim is usual-minded. It doesn't mean there's an absence of thinking. You think, but you don't let that thinking hinder you. A lot of things kind of integrate into the word Mushim. I don't consciously use it, but it happens spontaneously. Here's this simultaneity of stealing the mind and discerning of the mind. You're conscious, but you're not conscious. It gives a sense of calm, an empty state of the mind. When I had that Mushin experience, I was realizing the eternal aspects of the quantum, like linking the past without conscious reflection, without thinking. It was sort of, he calls his experience a sort of sudden enlightenment. He said, he even asked himself, okay, so I just had this experience of Mushin. The next question is, so what? I only realized this experience after having it. Mushin, so what? For life, he realizes this after the fact, after having had it, that this Mushin experience is something that is important for his life. If I had this sense of special feeling, that I'm about to discover something, I was taking refuge in this new possibility. I didn't want it. It just happened. All of a sudden, I had this urge to know, to reflect on it. He felt this Mushin experience that he had never experienced coming, and then he was ready to experience it when it happened. It's all reflective. It's a sort of post-realization, subsequent realization of what he had gone through. Once he had the experience, he immediately interpreted it from the perspective of the practice, taekwondo, that had him experience that transformative experience. Bill says of simultaneity of these of samadhi, prajna, and shila. I let myself actually do the motion, be the motion, to not force the motion. Usually that's where the success comes in. So, from a conscious thought process to a subconscious thought process. Do it as opposed to thinking. Repetition simplifies the situation, a sense of confidence where you allow it to happen, as opposed to making it happen or purposefully doing it. It just comes out. Allowing it to happen is almost the same principle as love, personification of your own technique to express yourself. He talks about that simultaneity feeling as a feeling of love, of totalistic love, is no longer my mind as far as my conscious thought is concerned. Most memories having a feeling of doing something right, you start to feel a series of motions. You don't have to actually think about replicating those motions. It's truly memory of the mind. The mind is absolutely involved at the moment of execution, but it gets filed into subconscious thought. It becomes more of a feeling as opposed to a thought. The technique is what feels right. Phil, in his experience of simultaneity, it seems to be a type of sudden realization of something that is suddenly made conscious. It occurs even though I do not plan it, because you go through the process. You might not plan it to happen and have no intention. You gain something without the heart or mind, or without the thought. You have no control over it. How can you control something that you really form out of repetition? It just happens. Everything comes out of your individual mind. But there are times when you don't really have time to go through the thought process. You just let your reaction do the job. And the key is to make it simple. Wisdom grows through repetition. Wanjong talks about simultaneity. Martial art practice is a kind of moving meditation. Inspiration comes in waves, not necessarily during the activity itself. It'll come to, things will gel in my mind while I'm relaxing, and it'll come to a sensibility, realization. He will get a sense of looking for some kind of connections, even when he's not practicing. Martial art practice is a constant evolving, and moments of feeling some sense or some enlightenment from that personal practice. The more you understand about the fundamentals, the more it widens your frame of reference. You get more and more, you get deeper and deeper and wider understanding. At the same time, simplifies your point of focus. You get an intuitive sense or feeling for the whole of the interaction. It fits together as a harmonious fashion. It's gotten to be a habit of unconscious competence, quieting the mind, subconscious competence. Because there's an awareness that might not be at the fully conscious level, but still our subconscious is reading the energy of the circumstances. Everything is involved in that interaction. He talks about it as inspiration. It becomes cohesive, like a moment of enlightenment. It came to be understood at a soul level, at a transformative, deep level of his whole being. I'd like to say I'm a different person from that point. Peter talks about in terms of simultaneity. You understand it and you feel it and you can't use any words to describe it. It's a feeling within you. It's a truest understanding. It's an epiphany, in a sense. It can be, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a spiritual experience, but it's an aha moment. And when you get it, that's only when you free yourself. It takes mastery, you have an epiphany to free yourself, to make mistakes, but to create. Mastery means freedom. It's total awareness. It's not really shutting anything out, but it's to focus on within. Something very subtle, but you will know when you experience it. You're at the ultimate point of freedom when you have this simultaneity experience. You just have to be ready for it. It doesn't matter how long you practice. What's really important is what you experience. You can have one experience and it wipes 30 years of practice all away that can fundamentally change everything you've done up to that point when you're thinking too much. How long will it take? That depends on you. But you should first free yourself. How can you be? How can you develop into something else when you're bringing you, this baggage? It is a spiritual experience. It's freeing yourself of you, of the ego, because personality is not spiritual, it is man-made. You're freeing yourself of your own egoistic personality. Alvin talks about this, simultaneity experience as a flipping of a light switch. He uses the word click. It's not like a gradual thing that happened. It's a boom, like walking right through a doorway. And now look at the size of the room there. There's a gradualness in working up to it, but like flipping a switch on a light, it's just boom. Everything around you changes. Seeing things happening around you that you may not have noticed before. He sees that experience of holistically changing his life. The cultivation of the awakening experience is what you should cultivate. The awakening experience in your post-experience practice. So you should cultivate the transformative experience that you had while still doing the techniques and behaviors that you used to help you have that experience. I like the feeling of getting something right. Having a moment of brilliance is something euphoric. It makes you want to practice longer. So that feeling over and over, it gives me motivation. Re-experiencing these are key to my continued practice because the interconnectivity between martial art and life is a sense of feeling, a sense of being able to understand yourself as a better person. Phil also talks about practicing after you've had the experience is basically the same thing, but now it takes on a different shape. You know something that has fundamentally changed your understanding of what you've been practicing after having had this transformative experience. Peter talks about gradual cultivation. I asked him a question, what goes on in the mind at the epiphany moment? Understanding freedom. I didn't need all of that training and discipline to have the epiphany, not at all. What I needed was to not worry about it and relax. I was alive when I had it. I was free to express myself. After the epiphany experience, you will question it. Now it's your choice to accept it or not. My life changed after that. I became more aware and more open. I asked, after that experience, what was the use of continuing to practice? Because there was no more to learn. Because there was more to learn, but I didn't do a lot of things the same way. But he also said, after having that epiphany experience, I don't have to practice anymore. I don't practice anymore. I just do my activity, my practice, whatever I want. But that epiphany experience changed him so fundamentally that he actually felt the need. He actually felt the feeling of not having to practice anymore. Alvin talked about the experience as a click. Everything changed just like the light switch. After the click, being enlightened, being able to see all these things, you can become a harmonious, kind, nice person. So effectively, what you do is because of what you are. Not having to decide anymore of what you're going to be. You just be. And that's why I asked, are you saying that the extension of technique is feeling? Yeah, you feel it, but you also just know the feeling is right because you've done it so many times and you've analyzed it so often that you have done all that. You know it's right because it's part of you. Let's discuss the results of what the long-time practitioner said. The development of both Shila and Prajna, or the Shila of Prajna syncretism, must include action or enactment or practice of technique or behavior. So you must be doing the things. Continuous refinement of technique and or behavior is achieved through ongoing reflection on inaction, thus practice, while in a martial spirit state of self-reflection and focused concentration. We all talked other things that came out of this discussion. Continuous and gradual cultivation of a pre-transformative experience practice or post-transformative experience practice. As continuous gradual cultivation appears to be a key imperative in most practitioners' approach to practice. Repetitive practice is a kind of ritual to put their mind in a right state for something that they sense could happen, may happen. Many long-time practitioners have experienced a paradigmatic shift, either understanding awakening or transformative experience or paradigmatic shift or aha experience at some point of the practice that fundamentally changes their view of practice going forward. Internalization and intuiting of technique and behavior and wisdom seems to be correlated with a sense of rightfulness or clarity that motivates long-time practitioners towards an experience of harmonization or syncretism or simultaneity. The practice towards the syncretism of knowledge and learning of technique, of the syncretism of continuous development of understanding of wisdom based on enactment of Shila, and continuing syncretism of focused concentration appears central to the potential for a practitioner to experience an instance of understanding awakening, transformative experience, paradigmatic shift, which may be Shila Samadhi practice. Practitioners see interrelatedness and relationships among aspects of their martial art training, including behavior, technique, and people associated with them, their students, their peers, their people around them, as very important to their long-time practice. Long-time practitioners should talk with each other about their ongoing understanding of what practice means, to augment their and our understanding clarity of an expectation of practice, and to share their understandings of it with each other. These are the things that I got from my long-time practitioners' discussions about their understanding of what practice means. Finally, the way in which participants subjectively perceive and describe instances of state of mind associated with samadhi and prajna demonstrates the paradoxical nature of these states. And participants allude to a simplicity or essence of a technical and understanding amalgam that concurrently appears to them to have a functional element that can be intuited after they've had that paradigmatic shift of practice. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to your comments, critiques, and questions of my